Hello and welcome to another episode on A Podcast. Your host, Stephen Maxted. And today we have Andrew Smith with us, former MLA and minister based out of Winnipeg, Manitoba. But you've also had experience federally as well, which we'll get into today. And Andrew, I'm pumped to have you on. That's a little bit of a different topic than we've had on, but I'm excited to discuss it. It certainly is, news headline worthy, and I'm more excited to chat about your experiences in the space. So thanks for making time today. And yeah.
Well, thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it, and looking forward to the chat.
Yeah, this will be good. Now, Andrew, why don't we start off by, I have your bio, and we were just chatting before here, but why don't you give the listener a little background on your journey, and then we'll get into it today.
Of course. Well, actually, I started out of university. Well, to go back even before that, I was always interested in politics. Always had an interest in it. I'd helped campaign when I was in high school. I had a local MLA at the time. Her son went to school with me, and I helped on her campaign. So I've always had an interest in politics. Always fascinated me. The idea to be able to make decisions and help build a community, but also just the nuts and bolts of it. Both of those together really made it interesting to me. When I was in university, I studied politics as a political science minor, so it wasn't overly an emphasis of my education background. And even after I finished university, I went into the private sector and worked for a small company. It was basically a startup on the East Coast. A long story how that ended up happening, but I worked there. And during that time, I actually worked with some folks that were positioned out of Ottawa just through business. And I thought, what's the best way to transfer into politics? I was going to come back home to Manitoba anyways. And someone gave me the best advice was, well, just go to Parliament Hill and knock on doors. Now, it's a little bit difficult now to do that, given we've had some terrorist threats there and that. But this was just before those days. So I went there, sent my resume out to all the MPs that were from my political persuasion in the province of Manitoba, and went to see them in Ottawa. And somebody was actually hiring at that point. And that's where, I guess, hard work and opportunity meet, right? And this person was just looking to bring somebody in as someone off the staff, assistant. It wasn't going to be a major role, but I said, you know what, I don't mind that. I want to learn from the ground up. So I basically went from, staffer serving coffee to one day becoming minister of a major department in government Manitoba. So that's been my trajectory. Of course, once I got working for this member of parliament, I worked for two others as well, and then came to my area where I was living in Southdale at the time, and I saw the provincial party had no real organization in the area, so I started organizing, raising money. I spent a whole summer just working, not only my job that I had, but doing this on the weekends and evenings. I didn't take much time off. I was just working all the time, get that set up, and I ran for the nomination there and won that seat.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so it's been an interesting ride for me, and it did come to an end in 2023 by 112 votes.
That's incredibly close.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it was. We didn't really have a clear idea of what the actual final count was going to be for about 2 weeks. So that night, it was looking. Even I had CBC in my office saying, "I think you won," basically. We're not sure yet. And then they count. They had to do a recount, and actually had some of my volunteers go in. They did a whole process where they want to count all the ballots to make sure everything was accurate. It turned out there was about 112 votes difference at the end, anyways. So I was the closest, and I think Waverley was the other constituency, the two closest in the entire province that election. Our two communities. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Talk about every vote making a difference.
100%, right? Like you think of one street, how many people you could have pulled off that street, that could have made a difference between a win and a loss, right? And I think, too, a lot of people were lined up. I remember Sage Creek, the lineups for the polling stations are huge. And it's like 7:30, 7:45. I was still out trying to canvass at the door, say, come on out and vote. And I could see the lineup is huge. Even if they got to the lineup, probably weren't going to vote.
That's wild. Because there's a cutoff time ultimately, right?
Well, it's 8 p.m., right? So, and how each station worked, I don't know those details because I'm sure each one has their own little idiosyncrasy.
Wow.
Yeah. So Since then, I mean, I've mentioned this before the podcast started here, that I've done a few things. I've taken on a few contracts here and there, and looking to, there's a few things that I'm hoping to land as maybe a more full-time position. But right now, I'm enjoying the contract work that I'm getting, and it's a different pace than it was, say, in politics, where your first meeting starts at like 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning, and you don't get home till midnight. So one of the aspects of being a politician and a parent is a little bit more difficult.
Oh, it definitely would be. That's very interesting that your schedule would, starts that early, goes that late. I mean, I have some experience in this space from my family, home base, talking about it and stuff. But I don't think enough people realize how many hours are put in. It's super easy to criticize on one end of things, regardless of what party you're with. You're probably still putting in some long hours to make things happen.
Well, I think a lot of it is there's two things. There's the business side of governing, and then there's the public facing side, which is often you got a lot of events. If you're a minister, you got all your meetings through the day to make sure that your department's running properly. You're meeting with stakeholders that are impacted by your decisions. But in the evenings, you've got all kinds of events, whether it's in your community or maybe it might be an industry association that's affiliated with your department, right? So you might go from the Heavy Construction Association dinner, and then 2 hours later, you're dropping a puck at the local hockey game, right? You never know.
Yeah.
That's sounds like you got a company in the background.
Yeah, my buddy. He knows better. He's my colleague, though. Yeah. He's in the other room,
but yeah, that's basically it. So that's the life is pretty very busy. So I've got a young family, and after politics, my son's become a lot closer to me since then, because at the time,
for sure,
Dad was the guy that came. I think I drive to school, and that was it, or daycare at the time, and that was it. I wouldn't get to see much time with him. And now there's a very good relationship, so I can appreciate no matter who or what party you're with.
Awesome. Okay.
Well, it is a tremendous sacrifice, regardless of what party you're in, and you kind of alluded to that earlier. So obviously, anybody who's in public service, I have a tremendous amount of respect for the service they do. Now, I'll get to the point where I don't always agree with them, and sometimes that can even get to a point where parties start to, I would say, less gentlemanly and more aggressively, pursue their own interests. But nonetheless, I still have respect for those who do put themselves out there. It's look, you're living in a fishbowl, particularly in this era. Social media. I mean, someone can take a picture of you walking down a street and superimpose it in another background and make it look like you're doing something nefarious. Whether people believe it or not, it's a different story. But it's always got the back of your mind saying, "Well, how's someone going to turn this against me?"
Right.
That is one, especially in the social media era, where it's great that I don't need to rely on traditional media anymore to talk to constituents. I can do my own thing on social media, but at the same time, others can come at you, whereas traditional media may be a little hesitant to take something that's obviously incorrect and place against you, at least local media anyways.
That's a really good point too. Everyone's pretty quick to turn something into a meme, on the lighter end of things, right? And then be like, we see a lot more of that, probably more on the south of us border here, in terms of my entire feed for the last bit has just been meme on meme on meme, whether on stuff that's going on down there. And we're not quite there, but I totally hear what you're saying, right? It's like one bad angle on a picture, and I'm sure you've seen, I don't know, there's this one that sticks out of my head. It's very obvious, photo just to make light of this, but on one end it's like this, I think it's like a lion carrying her cub or something. And it's like from this angle, it looks like she's eating it, and the other end is just mama lion carrying it around. So you get one bad angle, and the whole story can be totally, twisted around. And you really highlight the importance of having control over your own media and having it, good support that way, and just how delicate that can be as well, though, right? We see how quickly things can go viral, and ultimately, I think it's your point there too. And I think where you're going with this is you're always trying to do the thing that's right for the community and serve best as you can that way, but also not everything's going to go as smooth as planned. Well, I even think you just mentioned having a kid. It's like I used to coach hockey and stuff And there's politics with 10-year-old hockey. Can you imagine how much more magnified that gets as time goes on? And there's bigger contracts involved, more people,
Yeah.
salaries, livelihood, egos. It's just obviously it's going to be more complicated.
Oh, 100% more,
So,
absolutely. And particularly, like I said, in this disruptive world that we're in, right? It's interesting.
yeah.
When I got elected in 2016, and it wasn't terrible. Social media was 90% positive, and there's 10% negative. And I'm just throwing numbers out there, but that it was certainly weighted in favor of positivity.
Right.
By 2019, 50-50, and by the time 2023 came along, I couldn't believe how angry it was online. I understand why it's happened. We can get into that a little bit, but it certainly was, social media being like Facebook, and Facebook's always supposed to be it gives you that image of sitting on your couch with your friends chatting. That's kind of the Facebook platform to a cage fight. That's where it's
totally. Yeah, there's some angry keyboard warriors out there.
Oh yeah.
I don't even know if they're all real. We talk about this quite a bit on the marketing side. It's how many of those are actually real people? And then also I feel bad for some of the people that spend that much time on there being angry. They probably don't have a lot going on. You can't take it too personally. But
no. It's often they're bots.
Yeah.
But bots stir things up, right?
Yeah.
So
make it be known.
Yeah. You got this person who's got 1 follower and 100 posts. It's okay, sure.
Right. How did you manage that as time was going on? You mentioned 2019, it was kind of a little bit of an uptick. And as soon as you said 2016 start, I was yeah, that would have been a lot quieter online. I remember I was working in agriculture around that time, and I'd say 2015 sticks out for a couple of reasons for me in that year. And I remember that being not as much of a thing. It was almost kind of okay, you can see Twitter with farmers is very popular, and you could kind of see it starting to trend that way, but it still wasn't taking off. And so how did you manage? Did you ever go back and read comments? Have you seen those posts where people go back and read the angries, or did you have a lot of that happen?
Yeah,
I guess?
yeah. Sometimes I read the comments, get a kick out of it. I know some politicians would do the angry comments and they read them out on Instagram or something. I never bothered with that. I didn't want to give too much credence to people. If it was a real comment from a real person that I knew that was mad, I took that very differently, as opposed to just bot farming and people out there trying to make just trying to stir it up. Because there are real life bots too. I don't know if you call them bots, but there's real life trolls in the community that are actual people.
Sure.
You know who they are, and there's often either they have political ambitions or they're just nothing better to do, to be honest.
Yeah. I mean, there's always going to be a variety of people, and maybe they're going through something hard, and that's their only outlet, unfortunately.
So exactly. So managing it, I mean, I know some MLAs and some ministers particularly, they handed the social media over to their staff. I never did that.
It was my hands on deck. Yeah.
I don't want someone who has. I mean, sometimes the staff are assigned to you, so you can control who they are. I don't want that person there, and who knows what they're doing when they're logged into my account. So no, it was always me. I would do it. They could always recommend, "Hey, minister, we should probably post this." They come to me with content ideas, but I never let them do it. So I always like to do it, control my own image.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, we've definitely seen it have an impact on, or appeared to have. I mean, I think locally here, a strong presence definitely helps online there. Now, maybe shifting gears to, or unless you want to run with that topic for a sec, but
Go ahead.
I was going to say, we were talking before, and I think it's something I really want to highlight or chat a little bit more about is your time in Ottawa and having experience working for other ministers. And it would have been, I believe the time it was when Stephen Harper was in power there and stuff. And what was that experience like?
Yeah, well, I mean, I worked for the member of parliament. I worked for 3 of them out of the constituency offices here in the city or in that. But then I did go back and forth from Ottawa quite a bit, depending on the MP. One MP had me there quite a bit, others less so. But it was interesting talking about a different era. It was just the beginning of the social media era, right? I remember in 2008, Barack Obama got elected, and that was when politicians all got on Facebook. It was still lingering that Obama type engagement on typically Facebook. Twitter was a little bit less so at the time. I remember people were afraid of Twitter because if you didn't, there was no activity at the time. Things didn't go viral like they do with X now.
Yeah.
So at the time you put something out there and no one says anything and nothing happens, it just looks like there's dead air, like you're talking to nobody. So that gives you a concept. That's what it was like. There was no, it wasn't as fast moving as today, but not as disruptive either, right? You wanted to produce content. You had time to do it. You had time to review, say, press releases. And really what you do is you use social media to leverage traditional media coverage. Now, it's a different world. Now, social media by far has eclipsed the mainstream media. But it was interesting. I know working with the federal government or working with the federal conservatives so I think I was 2009 when I started with them.
Yeah.
Until about 2015. And then I went to run for my own seat provincially. That was, I think a lot of folks would be surprised to realize how controlled the Canadian system is compared to the American system. So if you're an MP in Ottawa, party doesn't seem to matter too much. The talking points and all the message comes from above. You get your daily talking points. This is what you say to certain issues, right?
Okay.
So I think that might have started with good intentions. Like, okay, this government is going to go in this direction. We don't want MPs spouting off about things that don't make sense or not correct. So we're on the same page. But it got to a point, and I think every party's got this problem where it's just message discipline. You just say what you're told.
Right.
And in the U.S., it's my understanding they have a little more freedom, right? You could see a lot of the members of Congress can speak their mind a little more freely. I mean, some of them to the point of being crazy, but it does show you that they have a little bit more freedom than, say, a parliamentarian here in Canada.
That's very interesting. You know, when you say that, my immediate comparison was like years ago, and I think everyone probably went for media training around the same time. Maybe it was the same company doing it, but in terms of like more of a hockey fan, I watch all kinds of sports, but remember back in the day, you used to have like guys kind of go off like unhinged a little bit after a game with some emotions and stuff. And then there became a point where I was just like, there's no entertainment factor in the interview after the game. There was not a lot of emotion. It felt very controlled, probably for the better in some of their PR stuff that they had to manage after the fact. Obviously, like some of the old school guys that I remember watching as a kid. But I remember there was a defined moment where, there was way less, like freedom as far as that goes. It was like, good game. One of the corners did this, did that. And I'm sure that's the comparable that you're kind of making there in terms of, okay, things are good, the economy, whatever, interest rates, some kind of blanket comment that needs to be set, and that's it.
That's a great analogy using hockey, right? I mean, I think once upon a time, politics was a little bit like Don Cherry, and now it's gets sanitized to the point where I think what's happening is social media didn't help when it came on site, that people thought the littlest clip that comes out, and media was really bad at that. Traditional media was terrible. They'd clip you saying something out of context and then run it 6 times, and you had no way to fight back because when they interviewed you again, they'd still do the same thing to you. And I remember one of the MPs I worked for, this person, I won't say any more than that to identify them, CBC came to them and asked them for an interview and said, here are the questions. And the questions were all kinds of stuff, what your cultural background, your ethnic background, your professional background. And then one of them was religion. The last question, you fill out the entire questionnaire, sent it back to them, and the entire story turned on its head. It was attacking this person for their faith. That's all it was. It was an attack. Wow. He was used to attack. So things like I could see where parties and all kinds of professional organizations started getting worried because you could take something out of context and make it really or appear worse than it really is. And I think that's where that happened. But it came to a point, I think, where it's overly sanitized. And now you could see south of the border, the Trump effect, which was almost like a release valve saying, well, I just want to hear people be real again, whether you like what they say or not. And I think there's a lot to do with the Trump success in his 2 elections, right? Particularly this past time, he said what was on his mind, whether people liked it or not. It seemed to be authentic. Whether it's authentic or not, I'll let your viewers decide that. But I do believe that there was an element of people who believe that it was authentic, and that's I think appealing to a lot of people.
No, I would very much agree with the side of it being, like pure and authentic, or the message doesn't seem as scripted, from the stuff that I've seen too. But I mean, even on that end, you don't get to see, crossing the border here. Our news is pretty filtered, as we've kind of lightly dabbled on. It's actually something I worry about, like a little bit too, even doing like a panel thing on Monday, and I'm like, oh, it depends how this is cut, like, or whatever. There's nothing bad in there, but if you were to take something out of context, it's like, hey, like you really got to almost like be in the room. And even though, like, I mean, we produce podcast world and stuff, and it's, we're always doing short clips, and we see the benefit of them, but there could be a, kind of we'll say like the dark side of that. And then, I guess when we flip that back to the switch of serving people in the role that you're in before, and still serving folks in the future here in other capacities, but there's so much time spent in the nuance of the political side, when I'm sure that there was moments of being frustrated, like, hey, can we not just get this thing done instead of arguing about whatever things that have surrounded the actual topic. I know there's some things that I view right now, and I'm kind of like, hey, like this seems like it's taking way too long. Without getting too specific unless we wanted to, but it's like, hey, like this is a pretty easy decision. And I think in different times in history, we saw a little, even involved in 2020, we saw decisions being made pretty quick on things. And if we treated maybe certain things in the same capacity, it'd be a pretty easy thing to make. And maybe taking some notes out of the private sector on some of that stuff, because the business in a sense, or government is kind of a business, or touches a lot of them. But it's interesting you say that. So, yeah.
Right. Well, I think the the problem, a lot of it is there are, the U.S. system particularly is a checks and balances system, right? So it's tended to not have essentially a dictator. But if you get to a point where there's so many checks and balances, nothing gets done, that's no good either. And you can see the constant turmoil that occurs in Washington, right? The shutdowns and the threats of those. And in Canada, it depends. I mean, if you have a minority government, like we had federally for how many years now, it just becomes totally ineffectual, unless you have one political party that just completely kowtows to the government, which has happened here, as we've seen. That's why the Liberals are still in power, largely.
Right.
It is difficult to get things done. And even with a majority government, let's take Manitoba, for example, there's an agreement that when legislation is introduced, the opposition can kibosh 5 pieces of legislation. And just as they come out here, here's what there's agreement. There's they call a House leader from the government side and one from the opposition side. They make that decision, and they're going to say, we're not going to support these 5 pieces of legislation. The rest will go to, we won't necessarily vote for them, but we'll let them go to debate. So even that, it does slow down. Well, I understand there's a democratic process to it. It also slows down the actual business side of government trying to get things done.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
And how long would it take for something to come to topic and then get pushed through government, just to give people like some insight there around what that timeline truly looks like? Because I mean, I just made it sound like pretty light, and we're like, oh, like, why can't we make decisions quicker? But do understand that there's a process behind it, regardless of who leadership is and what that looks like.
It could take the whole term. I mean, what happens? There's different sessions to Parliament and different sessions to the legislature.
Yeah.
So, but if you have a 4-year term, you could each session bring the same legislation back. And in the case of Manitoba, where there's that agreement, it may never see the light of day. I know we were looking at moving towards a private model of retailing for liquor. And I was the Minister of Liquor and Lotteries. I was the last one of the PC government, and there was a few before me, each introducing legislation to try and go from the distribution would have kept MBLL, so Manitoba Liquor and Lotteries, would still have a public distribution, but the actual retailing would have been private. It would have been actually like a pilot project to start that process of going towards a private model of retailing in Manitoba. And that, I can't remember which minister started it, but it would have been years before I came there that they've been trying to get it done. So again, if the opposition says, nope, we don't go with it, then it didn't even go to debate, right? They go to a reading, you read it in the House, goes down and they say, no, we're not going to even entertain it after that.
Interesting.
So yeah, that in a sense, I mean, whether that is across the country, I don't know too many provinces do that. That just became actually, it was our party who, the Conservative Party, that negotiated that with the former NDP government. So it's been around for a while, and it does explain why some things just never get done.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That must have been actually a quite interesting role to be in suggesting that. And it's, well, sounds like it's been a long time potential, but keeps getting shot down.
Yeah.
We're still holding strong. Are we one of the last provinces to have that set up right now with the retail side of things?
Well, Ontario has a hybrid, as I understand. I mean, they still have the LCBOs, right?
Right.
But yeah, we'd be one of the more restrictive provinces as far as liquor. Now, the funny part is, and here's the problem, like liquor laws, excuse me, I'm fighting off a cold here.
Okay.
The liquor laws go back to the days of Prohibition.
Right.
So,
yeah.
And it's just been patchwork since then because of the way the system is. And now you've got this patchwork. To go back and fix it all at once, it's going to be very difficult. And politically, and given some of the, I guess, the processes might make it almost impossible to get everything done at once. So you have Winnipeg, which is a retailer, is Manitoba Liquor and Lotteries Corporation, right?
Right.
So what you got outside the city, you have private retailers because MBLL is not going to put a public retailer in on and all Manitoba. It just won't be able to do it. So they allow, in that case, and on and all for sure, they've got it's basically a hardware store. It's home, and they sell liquor there.
Yeah,
I go there a lot, but it's a lot of places around rural Manitoba are allowed to do that.
Yeah,
can't do it in Winnipeg, but in Winnipeg you can have private wine sales, and I think there's like 12 retailers that do private wine.
Right.
So it's been patchwork over the time, and now you've got this system that's not really. There's no equity in the system. Put it that way.
Right.
So the idea is, at some point, we'll let the Liquor Commission continue as a distributor.
Yeah. Because
they get a great deal because of the size of volume that they order. But then we have allowed the local retailers to buy. So, Stephen Maxted wants to go out and buy a liquor store. You can go out and buy a liquor store or start one, right?
Yeah.
And that's the only other change that was made under government that did get through was 7-Eleven, although they're struggling now as a business model.
Yeah.
That going towards a business model where they could have a little, basically like a restaurant or a deli, essentially. You could actually order alcohol there. You couldn't take it out. And we'd be allowed by law, based on the legislation that we changed, or rather the regulation we changed in our last year of government. They can do that now, of course. They have other issues, and we can get into the whole crime issue, but that's, I think, hurting them substantially. Having said that, other restaurants, I'm sure, and other little retailers would like the ability to sell alcohol as well.
Yeah, it's super interesting. Also, in my university days, I actually worked at the LC.
Okay.
So I have the experience that way, but I would also see the benefit on the other side. I've literally been on both sides of, I guess, the counter, and more recently it just feels like a lot less. I remember we used to have like quite a bit of a mandate on like certain levels of like friendliness in there, and it seems pretty cold, and whatever you try to go into a location now, it's not really like that. It's just not really like a retail store anymore. I mean, like I heard back in the day they used to just have like a counter, and then you would order off of a sheet, and then that was like, to offer, this is a pretty unique situation of having like a full retail, but you have to like check in before you go in there. That's more of a personal preference. I mean, but back in the day it used to be a little bit different, and I had a great time going there, but I think there is maybe, an opportunity to explore other opportunities. Other provinces, or most of them, are doing it. So I don't know.
It create opportunities for entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
Right. In an ideal world, there's no reason why you can't walk into, say, Sobeys and buy wine and liquor. I mean, if you want high-end liquor, that you probably have to go to a specialty store, or even the liquor store itself. Because right now, there are it was the previous NDP government that allowed the Liquor Commission or the MBLL to set up a little shop in some of these retailers.
Yeah.
The retailers like, well, can't I just sell it myself? This way I can decide what's in there. I control it, and it's my staff that are actually working there, right?
Right. Yeah, definitely. I guess on that end of thing, well, we probably should talk a little bit about crime. Actually, I had like a recent experience that was kind of unique. I guess we'll say it kind of caught me off guard. It was like before 9 a.m. But there's, I mean, the 7-Eleven thing, it's like, it seems pretty dramatic in terms of closures. Like, I don't blame the companies if they're experiencing high crime, but it's like the way that I looked on the map after identifying how many had closed down, and someone had highlighted to me and said, or maybe it was on the news too, I don't know where I saw this, but just the fact of like how much food, like they actually supply the area with some basic needs stuff, like milk, eggs, maybe a little for bread. It probably wouldn't be my preferred choice to go there grocery shopping, but some people, that's the corner store for them. And now that no longer exists, I think it's like 6 or 8 locations have closed down or something like that. So
some people who may not have transportation, right? If you're elderly, that may not be their first choice, but you can get to Sobeys, which is the location you're in. Absolutely, it's terrible. Well, crime has become issue, and I know you talked about an experience. I mean, just in my neighborhood, just 3 days ago. So I'm in Bonavista, Vista, so it's right behind Island Lakes, and one of the neighbors posted on the Facebook, the community group. He had a video of 3 guys. He's got a walkout basement. They walked up, and they came up to his house, and you could kind of hear their conversations. It was slightly audible. And what they did is they smashed the window, came into the house. They knew where his vault was, apparently. And his wife was in bed, and he walked into the bedroom. Now, I assume, though, he was out of town, so maybe they were watching. They thought everyone was gone. They realized she was in there, and she turned around, and they turned around and left.
Wow.
And it was great. So she was terrified. So apparently she's just kind of hunkered in the bed, hoping they would see her. They saw her. Luckily, that scared them off, and they didn't want to. They weren't there for a fight. They were there to steal something. Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, these are communities that used to be considered much safer. I mean, not anymore. Even one of my neighbors down the street was saying that 2 weeks ago she had drones scoping out the house, scoping out her neighbor's house. And so it was at night. It's not like it's, some kid playing around in the day. It was at night around, 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. So it's just in the last few years, it's really changed. And I always say Winnipeg, friendly Winnipeg, it's no longer friendly Winnipeg. It almost feels like Gotham City. I hate to say it that way, but it's it's not the city that I knew even 10 years ago.
Yeah, I hate to say it too. I've actually made that comparison offline.
Yeah.
Quite oddly enough. Yeah, it's funny you say that. I've actually used that quite a bit. And you know what, like it seems like I know that there was an incentive somewhere along the line. It was backdated a little bit, but I've always had security systems and cameras on my house. Not to say it's in penetrable. It's not like I have like gates and stuff. But you notice a lot more people do have cameras on systems on their houses. We had the circumstance and whatever neighbors talking and stuff, but no one approached my house. I also have like a doorbell cam, but apparently someone was scouting during the day, and like that night when I was going up to houses without doorbell cams and trying to open doors, counting on someone to have forgotten their door open. This is probably like 6 months ago. It was in the summer, so it wasn't like wintertime kind of thing. But it was kind of an alarming thing. I guess it happened last week. It seems like a good time to share it, but I don't want to talk about a whole lot. I feel like I've almost become like numb to this kind of news, but it happened to involve me. This guy with a pipe literally in his hand. It seemed like out of a movie, actually. I was coming out for my morning swim, and this guy approached me, actually struck my vehicle a few times, and then swung it at me. And I was just like, I don't have time for this. Like initially I was kind of like, hey bud, like, take a hike. And then I realized the state of mind that this gentleman was in. It was obviously not completely aware maybe of what he was actually doing substance wise is my good guess. But where I swim at is pretty close to a local high school. And, I was on the phone with 911. They did a great job, I think, of managing. They called me within 10 minutes later. But it's really a too bad use of resources. On top of that, I'm an individual that could manage that situation. I'd be really worried about someone who was like older or just like not super aware of what's going on in their surroundings, I'm in pretty good shape. Wasn't really that worried about either like just keeping distance at all, but I certainly would, be a little bit worried about that, I guess, if I was in someone else's shoes.
Yeah.
And it's just how quickly that can happen. And then, back to the business side of things, like we've seen a couple locations actually close down. Like there's in the Osborne area, it's kind of like a court. It's actually right near the ledge, or where a lot of decisions are made, and it's pretty evident. Like in that one area I've driven by, and I noticed there's a A&W now no longer exists there. See,
Yeah.
like literally the outline of the sign, and hopefully that's an opportunity maybe for someone to move in there on the positive end of things and take over and make a difference in there. But if big corps, I mean, it was Starbucks, I think it was an A&W and stuff, are not being able to manage that, it's usually a pretty telling sign. Something's not right, unfortunately. So,
Yeah, absolutely. It's terrible because I mean the community then gets further gutted, right? You have an issue moves into the community. It's typically addictions are what's one of the biggest problems that we have.
Yeah,
leads to crime, and then people move out of there, businesses move out of there, and then there's a vacuum, so more crime comes in, and then all of a sudden the community's at a state of decay. It's hard to reverse. I think a big problem too. A lot of help would come from a federal government changing the laws. I mean, right now we had that bail reform where you've got guys who are basically rotating a revolving door, right? They get arrested, the next day they're out the door. Arrested, next day out the door. Police are wasting time chasing these guys. There's an example here is in St. Mary's Avenue. You can look it up. It actually, there's an article about it. This boy, he's about 13 years old, approaches this woman who's, I don't know, maybe 19 years old or so, at a bus stop. And he demanded her phone, and there's an exchange back and forth, and she refused to give him the phone. So he pulled out his machete, and he hit her with it. So she showed me, because I actually ran into her. I met her at an event, and she was telling me about her arm being damaged. And I don't know what the recovery looks like now, but it was bandaged up. And she seemed like she was in good spirits, of course, but I don't know how much physical damage was done. I don't think she really knew the full extent until they take the bandages off and take a good look at it. But she was saying that, the police had arrested that boy like a few days before that, or a week before that, on a gun crime. So I think the police, I mean, I don't blame the police for the problems. I think the police are doing a fantastic job. I would not want to be a police officer on the streets right now, given the amount of chaos there is. But, I wonder what would happen if some of these violent criminals were just locked up.
Right.
Put them in jail, and it's probably how it's like 10% or 5% of the population causes all the problems. If you put some of these guys away, I'm all for second chances, but second chance doesn't mean you get arrested for a day and you're out again. that means you have to show some progress in life to be able to get to that point. If these folks in prison, I imagine you'd have a very different outcome. You might see a noticeable decrease in violent crime in the city across the country.
Interesting. And that's a federal policy that you're mentioning?
The province doesn't have a whole lot. I mean, the Criminal Code of Canada is the Canadian government. It's a federal issue.
Yeah. So interesting to me. I always want to be a sponge when having people on, but it's like, it's hard to sometimes, I think, for the person, including myself on that note too, to really understand like what is provincial and what is federal within the mix of things, right? We see politics online and it's like, look, it sometimes just seems like it's all merged into one, but sometimes some of our local problems are, blanketed across the country in terms of that. And it's a little bit out of our hands, so to say, right? Because I don't know how do you combat that locally, or if there even would be a way to change that policy wise.
The federal government can change that. I mean, locally, I would think one avenue would be prevention, but also helping folks with addiction, right?
Yeah.
I personally am not crazy about handing out drugs. I prefer
I was just gonna.
I don't think that's a good idea. BC's done that, and it didn't work out. They had to reverse that decision. And you know what? Hey, look, if it didn't work, and they have the integrity to say, look, it didn't work, and we're going to reverse the decision. I respect that, but I don't think handing out drugs to people is going to make it better. Safe injection sites. I mean, how do you? First of all, drugs injections aren't safe. Secondly, how do you police that? We have a hard time policing our neighborhoods, let alone policing and protecting folks who are using these drugs handed out to them at so-called safe injection sites. I think it's an overly idealistic viewpoint that you can hand drugs and see that you can help people at the same time. But the problem with it, it's recovery is hard. It takes a long time. So you're not going to recover necessarily in 3 months. It might take years to get off of fentanyl or whatever else drug that's people are using. But fentanyl is a big one.
Right. The way I was going to go with that too is I was just listening to a podcast. And I forget the episode specifically, but it was CEO of or Diary of a CEO. That host name is Stephen. Yeah. Did you watch the one on it was like dopamine addiction? I don't mean to throw you on the spot, but that particular episode, and I hope I'm referencing this right, but they talk about different addictions, and they use the rat as the example and access to cocaine. And when I was hearing this, I'm like, I don't know if people have heard this, like who are making decisions on these safe injection sites, because it's just totally given access and given over time. I mean, it's not a perfect science on this, and obviously it does take time. Like you mentioned too, I've unfortunately had experience with people that are close with me go through situations of addiction, but the thing was, it was basically prevent access. Like the harder you make, a little bit harder to get it, actually help the rat go back to like a normal thing. And not that rats and humans are perfect, but it's like giving that away. And like you said, BC is a bigger market, and they've also already done like the test run for it. So in some cases it could maybe help, maybe a little bit safer, but either way, like you said, risky, and it increases the likelihood of poor behavior. Ultimately, we know that that's not. We have a controlled substance that people have enough problems with that we sell through the problems that we were talking about earlier. With that causes a lot of issues on its own. We don't really highlight that as a gateway to other problems and issues, but definitely is. Whether people talk about it or not, but yeah.
And I think too, I mean, that's what I like about. And that's why I really appreciate being on this show here too, is the podcast world has been able to open up the debate on these things. Whereas I found media, it was more contrived before, where, they would talk, that one person had agreed with it, one person disagreed with it. And it's almost like a two-dimensional argument. Now you've added a third dimension here where Diary CEO, there's other podcasters out there, Impact Theory and others folks who do a great job of bringing experts and saying, okay, well, tell us, right? We don't just need the expert that CNN thinks is an expert. We'd like to hear from others as well. I mean, what vetting does CNN do? I don't know. And maybe they do, but I imagine it's more, it's the person they know, right?
Right.
Who pays the biggest ad for a chance to appear on it, right? So I do appreciate that. I know you can get sometimes incorrect information, but I think in a world where you want to learn more about something, you have to have the risk of incorrect information is worth the risk of one day getting at progress.
Yeah. And the full story, kind of like we were talking before about, that one bad angle shot. Have you ever had like a situation like that? I don't know if we get in the weeds on this, where like something was taken out of context and the actual story was different. And
there was, and I'll call them out on this one now, because there was I can't remember the name of the account. It was an Instagram account. And they would take all of my colleagues from our political stripe, and they would create memes about them.
Oh gosh!
And very insulting memes in some cases.
Okay.
And as soon as the election was done, the person shut it down. And I assume they got hired by the new government, is what I would assume. And so it was, but everything we do. I mean, they pull you out of a picture, or they would just superimpose photos around you in that picture, right?
Right.
And they made people look like animals and all kinds of stuff. Like the stuff that they did would have, if I had done that, I'd be in big trouble. Let's put it that way. But they're anonymous, and they could play that game, right? Now I think there's a bit of a cultural shift since what's happened in the U.S. There would probably be some pushback from the public. At the time, no one said anything. I was terrified to.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, it's definitely always like you were saying too, like there's risk within that, and obviously there were some experiences you literally had with being like pulled apart within that, and it's got to be a little bit like difficult, especially if there's other like, your staff, your team member. Like, can you imagine if companies acted like that? like Pepsi and Coke are just like going at it, right? Or Apple and Microsoft and making me. I mean, the internet probably does play a little bit into some of that stuff, but it's more generalized. It's not like they're the companies. Whereas in politics, it's a little bit more ruthless, and it almost feels like
It's a blood sport.
Yeah, definitely would be. Yeah, very personal.
I like the private sector is good. I don't mind if Pepsi and Coke use like guerrilla marketing tactics and that's funny.
Yeah.
I mean, you wouldn't have Coke degrading Pepsi, or if they did, they do it in a clever way, right?
Yeah. It would be hopefully seen with humor. Like they've made those like that one commercial that I think of often, or just right now when you said that is like the I think it is like whoever it was, vice versa with the Pepsi or Coke, but the kid gets like a few of the one drink. I think it was Pepsi's, just to get tall enough to hit the Coke button.
Yes.
And like like that's one that sticks out of your mind is like, oh, that's like clever, and that's in good natured humor.
Yeah.
That's funny marketing.
Yeah,
Exactly. The brand and like a healthy banter versus nowadays it's like some people just kind of get at things, but what do you think a big opportunity in policy change would be coming up for either provincial or federal that would have a big impact?
Well, federal for sure would have to be crime.
Yeah.
One thing. Right now, dealing with the tariffs, impending tariffs. I mean, the Trump threats, we've always seen in the past. Trump's bark is bigger than his bite. But if you don't react properly, he might get bit. So I think that's honestly, the federal government has delayed their inevitable election, right? I mean, they've Trudeau stepped down, but then he's pro-parliament, and then some of the candidates for leadership are saying, hey, you know what, we're going to negotiate with the NDP to elongate this. I think the best bet is going to election and get this over with. You can't have the Liberal Party of Canada without a mandate, a renewed mandate, negotiate with Donald Trump and his team, because they just got a mandate. I wouldn't say a huge mandate, but it's a bigger mandate than any other Republican has had in like 2 decades. They're emboldened, and they're going to look at that. They're not going to negotiate in good faith with anybody from the Liberal Party unless they go through a general election, because come October, come hell or high water, it's over for the Liberals. They're probably not going to win re-election. Now it's going to be depending on who leads them. They might be able to save the furniture, but we need somebody who's they need a mandate. A government needs a mandate to sit down there and say, look, if the Conservatives get the mandate that I expect they do, based on polling right now, they'll have a stronger mandate than the Trump administration has. It gives them leverage. Trump sees the weakness and he sees chaos, and he's thinking, well, I'm negotiating with these guys and these ministers, but you know what? Come October, they're gone, so I don't really care what they say. And even if they commit to me, the new government can rip that commitment off, and I have no interest in pursuing it.
Yeah.
I think we need they need an election, not prolong this. It's almost like their government is basically a broken down car that's held together with wire, and they're just hoping it doesn't fall apart. And it's got to go, or at least have an election. If you win it, that's a different story. But get the mandate from the people, because if Trump thinks that the government doesn't even have support of Canadians, he is definitely not going to respect the federal government, and we're starting to see that, right?
Yes. And I think, to like look at this in maybe like a very simplistic view, as I had recently, it's like regardless of who's in power, when you go through like that power change, or like weakness within like what we're seeing currently, I guess, with the step down to leadership. And I think it was kind of like poor timing in general too. Like if you had the biggest interest of the Canadian people, you maybe organize that a little bit better if you truly did. But nonetheless, decisions made, guy steps down. Now, no leader here, new leadership here, making changes like for, the greater good, maybe make some decisions that are, thoughtful for the general business sector up here, right? Because that's what it seems to be like the attack on. So,
I mean, I know the Liberal government is suggesting they're going to use or they're going to have a pandemic level stimulus or assistance package. I thought, well, I understand why industry is scared, but long term, you've got a that's inflationary. We don't need any more of that. We're already inflation. If you get tariffs, and then on top of that, you start pumping money by printing and borrowing,
Yeah.
that does not lead to good things.
No, I heard that. Or yeah, that comment that via social as well. And I was kind of like, that seems like we just learned that lesson about how that didn't really work out great. Yes, necessary at the time, and there were some good policies and programs put in place, but in general, a lot of that ended up not working out so super great for us, right? And yeah, exactly. You're just so you add in a percent, whatever. But yeah, I mean, historically speaking, it's kind of we go back to very instinctual beings in some ways, even within the political system, right? No leader there. Okay, we might try to take you over, as some comments have gone as far to say. But if you look at a very basic human nature, it kind of makes sense why it's kind of swaying that way. And again, what your point, why they may not even try to worry about who's in leadership, because who would kind of take that current situation seriously? It's like a super delay. What is it? It's like a 60-day window or something I saw before they even pick a leader.
Yeah, I believe March 9th is the last day. So they'll have a leader then. And then March 27th is Parliament starts again. So that leader's got, 2 weeks before they sit in the House. And between then and there, they got to negotiate, most likely with the NDP, to ask them, look, can we get a deal brokered here?
Right.
So that the NDP don't vote them down and they go into an election, right? They're going to face a confidence motion. For your viewers, that confidence motion basically is when Parliament loses faith in sitting government. If every opposition party in a minority government votes against the government, they're out. It'll trigger an election. And right now, the Liberals are hoping, I think, to make another deal with the NDP to prolong that.
Interesting.
But I mean, again, it's a government held together with wire string.
Yeah.
And, for the betterment of the country, at some point, I think you have to get a mandate from the people. Yeah, you get an election within your own party, but then you need an election with the greater Canadian population. And they're not so happy right now. I mean, you can tell there's a lot of frustration out there. People who are traditionally perhaps a little bit more liberal are frustrated with how things are going. You're going to have to get a mandate. If you can't get a mandate, then let someone else who can get that mandate so they can negotiate with the Trump administration, because Trump isn't going to pull any punches. He's going to do what he's going to do. Right. The only way you could hold him off is, he likes to cut a deal. If you ever read The Art of the Deal, I mean, I've read that before. It's transactional. You may not like it, but that's what he is. And if you can make a deal with him and you can negotiate in good faith with the Trump administration, you might be able to stave off, we're not become the 51st state. Second, you might be able to stave off a 25% tariff right across the board, which would be a huge hit to our industry. And to you and I, like the cost of consumer goods would go through the roof.
Yeah, we might have to really move to everyone having backyard chickens. Yeah, it's true. I just saw something yesterday about the cost of eggs or something going up like 20%, which I don't know what that translates to in terms of cents, so to say, on the dollar. But every little increment like that, whether it be like the increase of raw goods, materials that go into the food, and then the plastics, the packaging, everything else that does accumulate. And I think we've all kind of started to experience that to some degree going to the grocery store nowadays, where it's just like, oh, cool, this is a casual $200 shop for what used to seem like $60, and I think that's pretty accurate math.
Well, it is. Just $200 used to feed a family for like a week or more. I mean, now. Yeah, unless you're eating rice all day, that's not going to work. Yeah, fortunately, yeah. So that's the reality, and I mean, some of it's controllable, some of it's not. But let's not make a bad situation worse. And when you have a political crisis, and that can translate into an economic crisis very quickly. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, if I'm the positive end of things here, I think that everything does like cycle and come full circle with different sways in terms of, whether it be, softer policies from one government, and then we get a little hard in other areas, and hopefully it allows some, alleviation of stress, or maybe more investment into businesses filling those, local spots here within our system. I know we both have, connections more into like the startup space, and there's some really great creatives that we have here that
may come up with some awesome solutions for solving, things. But we also do need, the good policy to help back that up. Otherwise, greatest ideas may flounder
Yeah.
either way.
Yeah, you can't have a constant state of chaos. That's not going to work either. But no, I think it is cyclical. The world is always cyclical. We're in a tough cycle right now. We'll get through it, but you do need strong leadership at this point to do that. And I think 10 years ago it was okay to have it was just a different political atmosphere. People were more in a party mood. The fresh face, the young candidates, and all that. Oh, yay, let's go with progress.
Yeah.
I think now we've got there's a whole flip. I mean, Donald Trump is 70, 79 years old. No one's talking about people based on metrics other than what they say or believe they can actually accomplish. And I think that's probably a good trend. I mean, I don't know, Trump's a good trend. I'll leave that to your viewers, but certainly there is a recognition that experience and competence is important again, and that might itself help fix a lot of problems, or at least mitigate any major disasters that are coming.
Yeah, no, I mean, we're kind of seeing, I guess, like within policies that we have kind of addressed in terms of like, crime, some other stuff, and maybe having stronger home-based economics has obviously become maybe something in general, regardless of who you're going with, and kind of, creating those opportunities here. We have a ton of resources in Canada, I think, that are pretty untapped, and that's been addressed recently in the news media a lot, regardless of it being social media or whatever. Traditional news, it seems to be a continued topic. So hopefully we do see a cycle with lots of optimism and opportunities for everyone. And this has been really insightful, Andrew. I feel like this may have to be a 2.0. I say it once in a while. Yeah, we might have to have a series. Yeah,
sure, absolutely. Okay,
really
appreciate that.
Yeah, no, and I really appreciate the insight here and the discussion today. It's definitely a first for us on the podcast here, but it just seemed like good timing. And like we mentioned before, we've been following each other on social media for some time, and it's been great to dive in a little bit more before, during, and we'll probably chat after this too more. So thank you so much for making time in your schedule, and we look forward to chatting more.
Great, Stephen. Well, appreciate being on the show, and thank you so much.
Awesome. Bye for now.